When Oliver's feet suddenly began to hurt, he looked down and saw that he had trodden on a suspicious-looking stone. But after inspecting it more closely, he realized that this was no ordinary rock. Upon discovering it, he thought he had stumbled upon something out of this world. With the hope of making a large profit, Oliver planned to sell the gem to a jeweler. Everything in his life will shift now, but not like he had hoped. Oliver's foot hurt so badly that he had to hobble. The lifeguard came over to him and inquired as to how he was doing. In his desire to protect the stone, Oliver considered keeping it to himself. He wasn't sure why, but he felt compelled to show the lifeguard what he'd walked on. Eventually, Oliver showed the lifeguard his discovery. As soon as he opened his palm, the stone began to emit a bright light. The lifeguard politely inquired about examining the rock. Although he was nervous, Oliver finally handed it over to the lifeguard. The stone's luminescence abruptly faded as soon as it was handed over. The lifeguard couldn't believe it. Oliver was informed by the lifeguard that he may keep the stone. A weight has been lifted from Oliver's shoulders, but he would come to deeply regret his decision. Since Oliver already knew a good jeweler, he made up his mind to see him. Presently, this is the only person he can put his faith in. On the spur of the moment, Oliver made his way to Mark's jewelry shop. He counted himself fortunate that the shop was deserted. Mark was taken aback when he saw Oliver. Oliver began babbling about a rare stone he was trying to sell. Mark was first skeptical about Oliver, but eventually came around. Mark saw the shining stone in Oliver's palm, but he dismissed it as a keepsake. However, the stone's luminescence abruptly faded when Oliver gave it to Mark. Mark was at first totally befuddled, but then he had an epiphany. He just needed some time. After seeing the stone, Mark was taken aback. That was obvious to Oliver. It was as though Mark had a flash of recognition. After a day of research, Mark informed Oliver that the stone was genuine. Once he had that information, he could make a fair offer. Though hesitating, Oliver finally agreed to these conditions. The whole night, Oliver was restless. He could not get the stone out of his mind. Possibly a huge sum of money that might completely change your life. After a while, he slept off, only to awake an hour later drenched in perspiration. His gut told him something terrible was going to occur. Later that day, Oliver made his way back to the Mark. The atmosphere was really different when I walked in today compared to yesterday. It was clear that Oliver was no longer welcome. He chose to disregard his intuition. He needed to know the stone's value, obviously. However, Mark's behavior became more suspect. As soon as Mark and I started talking, he started behaving suspicious. To Oliver's dismay, he forbade Oliver to touch or even view the stone. It was unclear to Oliver. In any case, what does it imply? A mark had not been created at that time. He went on a long tirade. There was a huge disagreement between Oliver and Mark. Oliver demanded the return of his stone, but Mark refused to provide his own. As far as he was concerned, he lacked the authority to do so anymore. Since there were now more customers in the shop, Oliver cooled down a little. Then Oliver decided he wanted his stone back, and Mark went into the office from behind the curtain. Even though he couldn't find it, he was sure his stone was still around. Mark rushed in with Oliver, and the two of them continued to argue once inside. Mark eventually caved to the pressure. Mark handed Oliver the stone, but despite his best efforts, Oliver was unable to make it shine. When Oliver inquires as to Mark's involvement with the stone, Mark provides bogus explanations. After that, Oliver knows something is wrong. Mark handed Oliver a false stone to get rid of him, since Oliver's real stone was much heavier. It even seemed flimsy. When Oliver tossed the stone back at Mark, he knew he'd wasted his time trying to trick Oliver. As Oliver sighs, Mark returns the stone to him. Once Oliver had settled down, Mark told him he'd made a terrible mistake. The man should not have returned with the stone. Mark was sure Oliver would come to regret his decision. Oliver takes the stone and goes outdoors. He continued mulling over what Mark had just said. No good can come from this. Just what did he unearth, anyway? Once inside his vehicle, Oliver had the unsettling feeling that he was being followed. He couldn't afford for the stone to be damaged in any way. Oliver had no idea what would happen next. While leaving, everything ran well, and Oliver was glad to have the stone in his possession. Then he notices a dark vehicle following him. Is it possible that this is just a coincidence? Oliver took the same loop 3 times in a row to be sure. After a few seconds, he realized the dark vehicle had not moved from behind him. That can't bode well. To shake the vehicle, Oliver stepped on the throttle, but the van responded by picking up speed. Oliver was paralyzed with fear. Just for a second, he considered breaking his window and hurling the stone outside. But he couldn't bring himself to go through with it. By using his wits, Oliver evaded the vehicle that had been pursuing him. He was certain he had made a remarkable discovery. Yet, he was preoccupied with financial concerns rather than his personal safety, and sought to get rid of it soon. Oliver, realizing it was too late to see his usual jeweler, decided to try his luck with a different shop the next day. No jeweler would be open by this time. It was too late. For now, all he had to do was survive the night. Even Oliver knew it wouldn't be a breeze to do this. That night, Oliver was so antsy that he went to see a buddy. Before he sold the gem, he insisted on displaying it. Going to see this buddy was arguably the best option he could have made, since upon his return he had a pallor about him at home. When Oliver came home, he saw a large crowd waiting for him in front of his house. Initially, he had no idea what was happening, but then he saw something. Oliver's neighbor had recognized him and warned him against going in. When Oliver gets home, the first thing he notices is the broken state of his front window. When we looked closer, we saw that his front door was also broken into. Everyone warned Oliver not to go in, but he ignored their warnings. He was crying as he walked in. The clutter and chaos in Oliver's residence are overwhelming. What Oliver saw next, he just could not fathom. The fact that nothing had been taken made it clear that the stone was the target. His whole home was ransacked, and many of his possessions were destroyed. The only option he had was to contact the authorities. When called, the police did not want to attend since they believed nothing had been taken. However, Oliver urged that they appear in order to report. This was the only option for having insurance pay for it. The lady on the other end of the line did not seem pleased, but she assured Oliver that police would be sent. A police cruiser showed up after 30 minutes of waiting. One police officer was the lone passenger in the vehicle. Oliver dashed outside to inform him immediately. Up until he went inside, he seemed to be taking it seriously. The police officer entered, and as soon as he did, he received a call. His demeanor shifts drastically as soon as he gives an answer. He stared at Oliver, and then he stopped talking. Something isn't quite right, and Oliver can sense it. Oliver asks the policeman what's going on, but the cop assures him that nothing is happening. He then tells Oliver to make a complaint and that they will investigate the situation. Oliver questioned why he hadn't gone looking for the burglar. In this case, he remains silent. After the burglary, Oliver prepares a lengthy report, but to his astonishment, the policemen just re-enter his vehicle and speed off, without even taking a glance. Were they just not taking him seriously? Is there any kind of link between these events? Oliver is eager to eliminate the stone once and for all. He plans on visiting a jewelry store first thing in the morning. It's too late to discard it, since those seeking it will continue to track him down. Oliver did not get any rest on the drive to the jeweler. His friend and neighbor kindly offered him a place to stay at their house. Since Oliver no longer felt secure in his own home, he agreed. He timed how long it would take him to travel to a jeweler and drop off the stone. When the jewelry store first opened, Oliver was there very immediately. When he walks inside the jewelry store, he immediately gets the impression that he is anticipated there. Immediately, he felt at home and accepted. Perhaps Mark had mentioned the stone to the jeweler, or possibly there was something else going on behind Oliver's back. The gem merchant requested Oliver's opinion on the stone. His shocked reaction to the stone should have been a clue to Oliver that he was on to something. There was no light emanating from the stone. The jeweler then had Oliver try it on. As soon as Oliver put his finger on the stone, it began emitting a bright light. The jeweler then made a very large proposal. To Oliver, it may as well have been paradise. If he sold the stone, he'd not only be able to get rid of it, but he'd also be able to cash in big time. But the situation would become worse very fast. Feeling relieved, Oliver relaxed his guard. The jeweler was informed that he accepted his offer without much consideration. Finally, the jeweler promised to get the funds from his safe. It was a lengthy process, however. It seems like the jeweler was taking his time. When Oliver heard a commotion, he went to investigate what was going on in his office and knocked on the door. The jeweler, however, did not provide any feedback. He seemed to be intentionally delaying Oliver. Olivier was completely befuddled. Simply put, he needed cash. When Oliver walked inside the shop, he was immediately glared at by a guy who was already there. Even though he didn't know it at the time, Oliver felt like someone was watching him. Intense worry gripped Oliver. He stood perfectly still the whole time. That is, until Oliver had an agonizing sensation. Oliver fell to the ground without even noticing it. His assailant had come up behind him undetected. After leaving, the jeweler returned and told the guy that Oliver was, in fact, the person they were looking for. There was an emotional breakdown from Oliver. There was an abrupt increase in foot traffic, and more shoppers crowded into the jewelry shop. Minutes passed before Oliver understood the FBI was on its way. If Oliver had to guess, he'd say the stone was involved in why they were chasing him. After Oliver was taken into custody, he was informed of his right to stay quiet. Oliver was bewildered and had no idea what was going on. How true is the rumor that he was detained? Eventually, he was carried to an FBI vehicle and thrown inside. After hearing the news, Oliver was in complete disbelief. It was so bad that he passed out for a second. That was just too much to take in. A number of police officers made attempts to revive him. Oliver began to plead with the police to release him, but they had no intention of releasing him. To the closest FBI office, he was taken. When he walked into the workplace, everyone stared at him like he was a bad guy. Otherwise, Oliver would spend the rest of his life behind bars if he didn't straighten up his lie. The stone greeted him the second he opened his eyes. A lot of people wanted to know where he obtained it and who helped him. The astonishment had not worn off yet, and Oliver was at a loss for words. Then he was lined up with the others. He was pressed for information about his cohorts. The lineup participants did not appear to know Oliver and were taken aback by his presence. When Oliver questioned the police whether it was all a prank, they assured him that it wasn't. He claims to be unfamiliar with everyone there. Soothing himself, He assures the police that he is prepared to tell them everything about how he came to own this stone. The cops were intrigued and said they wanted to bring him back to question him more. Once Oliver begins to explain his perspective, it's clear he has a lot to say. While out surfing, he came upon the stone. His feet ached terribly from standing on it. He displayed the wound on both feet. The cops decided they would take his word for it and check out the beach as a result. Officers took Oliver to the shore so he could point them the exact spot where he'd discovered the stone. To approximately indicate the location of the stone, Oliver pointed. In an instant, a big number of police began looking into the situation. Thankfully, Oliver ran into the lifeguard he had already talked to. The lifeguard was willing to cooperate with the police. In doing so, he provided Oliver with an alibi that would prevent Oliver from stealing the stone. The cops eventually regained their faith in Oliver and began sharing details about the stone's status with him. The gem was taken last week during a major diamond theft. Fortunately, Oliver has a chance to clear his name. The true robbers were eventually caught because of the footprints on the beach and the increased number of individuals who discovered stones. The robbers kidnapped a jet full of jewels, but when leaping out of the plane, they dropped part of the gems into the ocean. All of Oliver's losses were covered by the insurance company. You like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation.